Hello, this is Cameron McEwen and Bob Dobbs with episode number 47 of our ongoing series of figuring out what my book meant. And we're on page 89, floating down to the second quote. We ended with the quote at the top of page 89 a month ago. So now we're looking at a quote from Cliched Archetype by Marshall McLuhan, Wilford Watson in 1970 from Cliched Archetype, pages 12 to 13. And here's the quote. And we're going to see what kind of question this evokes in Cameron. So the quote says, since Sputnik put the globe in a proscenium arch, that's in quotes, proscenium arch, and the global village has been transformed into a global theater, the result, quite literally, is the use of public space for, quote, doing one's thing. A planet parenthesized or bracketed by a man-made environment no longer offers any directions or goals to nation or individual. The world itself has become a probe. Then he has a quote, snooping with intent to creep, and then a second quote, casing everybody else's joint has become a major activity. As the main business of the world becomes espionage, secrecy becomes the basis of wealth, as with magic in a tribal society. Perhaps this is not the only latest form of cliché probe, but merely the largest and most perceptible. Now, I have a little statement at that point. There's more to the quote. Bob says, "We're starting to get what it means to be a global theater. McLuhan spelling out aspects of it, like everything turning into espionage." So that's a little comment I make to the listener. Then, or reader, then back to the quote. It is just when people are all engaged in snooping on themselves and one another that they become anesthetized to the whole process. Tranquilizers and anesthetics, private and corporate, become the largest business in the world, just as the world is attempting to maximize every form of alert. That is so accurate. Medicine changed in the 70s so much. That happened, what he's saying there. It to the max, you know?
Yeah, well, Ukraine is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. Okay.
Everybody anesthetizing themselves to everything through some sort of virtue signaling.
Yeah, and that creates Gutenberg wealth, largest business. Okay, so then McLuhan says, sound-hyphen-light shows, as new cliché, that means probe, are in effect mergers, retrievers of the tribal condition. It is a state that has already overtaken private enterprise as individual businesses form into massive conglomerates. As information itself, as I read this, you think of the popular dreams of the hippies and the counterculture or the right wing and left wing. They're so trivial compared to what was going on as McLuhan was laying out. Do you know what I mean? Nobody
That's right.
saw this coming.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And this is 10 years before his death.
Yeah.
And he's always saying, with every sentence here, he's saying, how can I say this so that you get it?
Yeah. Yeah. And he has a blurb on the book when it came out in 1970 that this is way more important than understanding media. He says it breaks new ground. And he had the phrase interactive media, was it? Intermedia. So then he says, after massive conglomerates, as information itself becomes the largest business in the world, data banks know more about individual people than the people do themselves. Now, these are jokes and stuff that comics talk about 50 years later, right? They play off these patterns.
But not just comics. This is what the whole world is about, right? So when he talks about information being the largest business in the world, you can understand by that the SWIFT system between banks, for example.
Yeah.
The SWIFT system controls the world's economy. And what is it? It's a translation between transactions. And now China and Russia and India and countries associated with them are challenging that model with another form of information.
Yeah.
And so then you have battles of media being far more important than battles between countries, or especially battles between individuals.
Yeah, battles between countries is a form of more Gutenberg wealth. Keep the old printing presses supposedly meaning something.
Yeah.
So it's a big distraction. So as information itself becomes the biggest business in the world, do you say data or data?
I say data.
Okay, data.
I don't.
Right.
Yeah, data banks, but I think you can say either one.
Yeah, data banks know more about individual people than people do themselves. The more that data banks record about each one of us, the less we exist. Now, this, I don't know of anybody in the 20th century who wrote stuff that was so accurate, like 50 years ahead of his time. I mean, I don't know, maybe somebody in science did something and it led to the crippled guy, Hawking or something, saying stuff about black holes or something. But there's so much that McLuhan says that they could put it into high school, say, there's only one subject, what McLuhan wrote. If you want to understand your world, high school students,
Mm-hmm.
Spend time talking about it.
Yeah, one way to think about the last sentence there is to think about what Heidegger was doing around 1930.
No, 1830.
No,
Heidegger. Sorry, I was thinking of Kierkegaard. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Heidegger.
So, Being in Time, Sein und Zeit, had come out in 1927, and literally nobody had understood what it was about. And so Heidegger was asking himself how that had happened, because he had written it as a kind of textbook for trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah, like this is like making it easy for people.
That's right, and he had done it easy for academics.
Yeah,
right. He had written it as an academic textbook for people that were highly literate, and so he had to figure out why it was that they couldn't understand what he was doing, even though it was written specifically for them.
Yeah.
And so in a series of publications starting in 1929 and going through 1930, he tried to show that there was a kind of abysmal drop that had to be made in the course of understanding, and instead of making that drop with him, people had tried to paper it over, and that was why they had not understood. And so he then took upon himself the task of trying to show how that abysmal drop works, both in terms of contemporary history and in terms of the history of thought. And so that's what he did for the next almost 50 years of his remaining life. But we're in the same place today, and McLuhan took up that same task. How are people to understand that their place in the world includes a understanding of the abyss, basically? How is it that the abyss allows understanding or issues in understanding? And so that's what he calls our place in the macrocosm in the long passage at the end of War and Peace, and what he's taking up again, both in Cliched Archetype and Take Today. Yeah,
so did McLuhan kind of dismissed Heidegger in Laws of Media? They said, yeah, he was knee-jerk responding to new requests for percepts, but he didn't understand where it came from. Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm in Laws of Media was put together by Eric, of course, and I have some posts on McLuhan reading Heidegger, and his readings, I think, are very good, and in general, they're very positive. So I don't take what he says in Laws of Media as being what Eric took him to be saying in Laws of Media. I don't take that to be his last word. I think McLuhan understood Heidegger in an unusual and an enlightening way, and what he did was he handed over the task that Heidegger was probing, and that he himself, McLuhan himself, was probing for us further to question. Right?
So,
for as an example, when he says in this passage, a planet parenthesized. What does that mean? It means that all human beings, everything that's ever happened on the planet and everything that will happen on the planet is parenthesized by a certain limitation. And human beings, in order to be real human beings, need to understand that limitation, need to come out of that limitation in order to understand themselves and their fate. So most of what's going on the planet today is an attempt to deny that limitation, an attempt to assert that, we know very well what right and wrong is, we know what progress is, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, they're offering directions and goals.
Yeah, it's all bullshit. Total bullshit, right?
Yeah. So where does McLuhan do accurate readings of Heidegger? What's the title of the articles that you have done on that?
Well, you could just click on Heidegger on the in the categories.
Okay.
And you would and get that.
Okay.
Plus, of course, one of the things about my blog that I think is interesting is that it has very advanced search capabilities. So in McLuhan research, people are always going on about, the digital this and the digital that. But in fact, McLuhan research is entirely book-based. Nobody pays any attention to the digital environment. It's quite incredible. And so you have somebody like Andrew Crystal, for example, who continually is praising, quote-unquote, the digital, but he, like the rest of the industry, doesn't pay any attention to the digital. It would be funny if it weren't kind of pathetic.
Yeah, what are they missing? What do you mean that he talks about the digital, but he ignores the digital? What's that mean?
Right. Well, it means the digital has two different senses, both of which are missed. So the one aspect of the digital is simply information that is primarily digital. So your book is an e-book. It's not a book.
Right.
Right? So in order to, one of the things that you would need to do in understanding the digital is you'd have to understand information that is digital from the outset. But then the difficulty is to understand the information that's digital from the outset. You have to begin yourself to understand digitally from the outset. So in order to read information that's digital from the outset, your mind has to be digital from the outset. And it's that flip that is the key thing. And if you don't understand that flip, and if you don't follow along with that flip, then you can't read McLuhan. You can't start to do McLuhan research. So we have a world industry of people going around and being McLuhan experts and publishing books on McLuhan experts and having conventions and all sorts of meetings where McLuhan is supposedly the topic, but nobody has started to actually read them.
Do you mean to read what are in his books?
Yes, I mean just what I said before, that to read information that is structured digitally, you have to have your thought itself needs to begin digitally. And in order to read McLuhan passages like the one you just read, or the ones from Take Today that you read last time, you can't read these passages by starting at the beginning and going to the end and following along. That's not how McLuhan writes. That's not what McLuhan was trying to say. But you have any passage from McLuhan, you have to read. You have to start at the end, and then reread or retrieve or replay how he starts.
So you click from 1975 to 1942 or something.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the reading.
McLuhan, yes.
Did it introduce something in general, or you just lately, or you're just remembering your reading of him, citing him as an example?
I can't remember the article. I think he did something on Havelock that he published in
last year.
In the Canadian Journal of Communication.
Yeah,
and he laments in there that people haven't done various things. But I've written extensively about them, and you and I have talked extensively about them. And so you have to say, well, why does that not count? And that doesn't count because it's digital. And it's digital in the two ways I was saying. It's digital in that it's not put into digital or digital in quotes. It's not put into digital form derived from the book. It's digital from the outset. And in order to understand something that's digital from the outset, your thinking has to start from digitality from the outset. And that's the whole question that McLuhan poses, and that McLuhan research is designed to avoid.
Are you saying that you take advantage of the fact that all the works are digitized, or that one can make a digital collection, and then you jump from 42 to 77? That's the way you see it's all one big work, or something?
Well, I wouldn't put it exactly like that. I would say that McLuhan, like any great thinker, so that the kind of thought that I'm recommending, or attempting to describe, or attempting to translate, reaches a high point in Plato already. So the need to think by starting again is already very plain in Plato, and he probably takes it over from older thinkers. So he spent a lot of time in his later career talking about the pre-Socratics, especially Heraclitus and Parmenides. So Plato already saw his task as one of taking over what had been talked about before, but attempting to clarify it so that people wouldn't mistake it. But the problem is that in attempting to translate what is already stuff that's difficult for people to understand, the problem of the initial understanding gets multiplied, gets squared, as you might say, or even cubed. So the great difficulty is that already for Plato, and then going through people up to Heidegger, and then on to McLuhan, the great difficulty is to try to show that the limitations of the world, the parentheses of the world, are what enable understanding, they're not what prevents understanding. And but people in general, and I would say it's becoming more and more the case, the less people think that they have anything to do with religion, anything to do with the sort of highfalutin thought, the less they think they have to do with those things, the more they're bound up by the rules of those things. So people are think that they have no relationship with God, no relationship with the tradition, but they become more and more tightly enclosed in what the tradition was about. And that's one way to understand the global theater, one way to understand the roles that people are playing. There's a roles that people play that they have some awareness of, and then there's roles that people play that they have no awareness of. And I'm talking about both of those in terms of McLuhan research.
Right. So I don't get, you say Andrew is talking about the digital, and then he ignores the digital. You're using that word twice. What's the difference?
Correct. Exactly. So what I said was there's information that's in digital form, and then there's the digitality that is needed in order to understand not only the stuff that's in digital form, needed to understand anything.
So why are you calling that digitality? What's that?
That's the ability to start from the end. That's the ability to understand that the up and the down and the beginning and the end are bound together by what you're calling intermediality here.
Yeah, so you're saying to follow up on whatever insights you get from reading an article by McLuhan is to go to Plato or go to Shakespeare. You're saying jump to other previous categorized information that you might think is not relevant.
That's one way to do it, but as you said a few minutes ago yourself, another way to do it is to go backwards in McLuhan and reread something, and then to come up in his career from there. So you're continually going from the end to the beginning. And the great need is to understand what's in between those. Why does that work? Right? What was going on already in McLuhan's early stuff that bore the seeds of his later stuff? Why does probing of his early stuff lead McLuhan to where he gets to in the later stuff? And how does that KNOT, how does that not work? And,
I see the people say today, well, McLuhan did a few books, open up the studies, now we need a new McLuhan, or we need to look at some new stuff, or make our own stuff. And you're saying, no, McLuhan pretty well did it all, you haven't read it all. You don't know what he's done. And so you don't have to look for new translators of McLuhan, new writers. You need to spend more time reading all of McLuhan. That's what you're saying. Right.
But when you say it's all there in McLuhan, the question is, what is that all? Right?
Yeah.
That cannot be understood in Gutenbergian terms. We're not trying to get to some great answer. Because the planet is parenthesized, as he says in this quote, humans do not have and never will have that great answer. Humans like to think that they can have it. They like to think that they can know virtue with no problem. They think they can know the meaning of life.
And then drop, and then not have to deal with something. Drop that. I've got that mastered. Move on to something else.
Right. But always moving on is always a question of either now I've got it, or what's the process? What's the linear way that I have to go in order to get it? But none of that works because of the parentheses. Human beings are in a limited context, and the great thing to understand is how do limitation and understanding belong together? And that belonging together is the intermediate that you're about to talk about.
Yes, that's exactly what my book is. I take the new ground, the tech body, and I go back and find it in McLuhan, rather than look at the latest science fiction or abstract virtual theoretician from somewhere that's getting interviewed or something, or even Jordan Peterson. No, I went back to prove that McLuhan anticipated the tick body. That's going back and finding stuff in McLuhan that no one knows is there. It's exactly what you're asking. Is what I've done in this paper.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mention Jordan Peterson, because he has this year lectured at both Oxford and Cambridge, lectures that are available in YouTube. And in both of those lectures, he comes up to the point where he should be turning to McLuhan.
Yep, I've seen that.
And so people are saying, oh, here's this great thinker, and here's all this sort of stuff. But in order for him to understand his own program, he really should be turning to McLuhan. But, of course, he's not doing it yet.
Because he's distracted by commenting on whatever's going on this week with Rex Murphy or somebody, whatever the news story is, or he's going the old circuit, the Gutenberg circuit like Oxford. He should deny. He should turn them all down, their request.
Perhaps. He certainly needs to enter into the parentheses in a way that he doesn't.
Yeah, that's what struck me is, wow, this guy goes right up, and McLuhan is where he needs to go, and he doesn't. And that's interesting. You watch this person, he's stuck there. He can't go through the door. He doesn't even know the door is there. Someone
because it's behind them. It's behind them in two senses, right? McLuhan's dead, and what McLuhan would indicate to him is you got to turn around and understand in a different way how you've come to where you are.
And nobody's out there to tell him that. There was about 4 years ago when I first noticed him, somebody brought up McLuhan, and he said, that's an interesting point. I've got to look into that. I bet he didn't. He's too distracted going around filling in the gap for people who don't want to do anything or learn anything. He's just become a package. Now, McLuhan, McLuhan didn't do that.
Filling in the gap is a great phrase.
Yeah. And McLuhan, when he went to the Oxford and these places, he stirred them up. They end up saying, well, we got this guy here. This guy's irrelevant. He doesn't help us at all. They don't say that about Peterson.
What he's talking about, contradicts himself. Yeah.
Peterson probably is going to get more trophies, Order of Canada, and all this nonsense. And meanwhile, we're doing the real work. That's these people.
Well, but I got to hand it to Jordan Peterson in that he dropped out of University of Toronto.
Yeah.
He's getting into arguments with the government of Canada and the Supreme Court of Canada. So he's being a contrarian at the same time that he's being this famous guy that you were talking about. And the great question is how those belong together. And I don't think that he himself has understood that.
Yeah, he's going to get lost in these rabbit holes, fighting these old bureaucracies. He's got to point out how they're not dealing with what's happening, not what they're doing. What they're doing, it's wrong what they're doing, but that's not the issue. They shouldn't be paid attention to anymore. They don't apply.
But the only way that he could genuinely do that is by realizing that he himself shouldn't be paid attention to.
Yeah.
So he wants to achieve some sort of clarification as the end goal of a process, and that won't work.
Yeah.
So the only way for him to do what he thinks he wants to do is to drop out.
Yeah. You can't drop out. Every dropout is a drop in. Is take
the only way to drop in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how you drop in.
Parentheses would show. Sorry, what did you say?
I said that's the way you drop in. You drop out.
Correct.
Okay, so
But notice, by the way, how that fits in with what I was trying to talk about with Heidegger in 1930, is that he was saying that being in time had not been understood because people did not understand how to drop out. They couldn't come to terms with their own finitude. But coming to terms with your own finitude is what it means to exist in parentheses, and that's where understanding is.
Okay, so let's go on to this, my commentary about what I've read so far, and then see what we've got to. So, I say...
And people should notice that one of the things that you're doing is you're picking out seminal texts from War and Peace in the Global Village, from Cliché and Archetype, and Take Today, and you're showing that there's something going on here that is both the same. McLuhan's talking about, quote-unquote, the same things, but in order to understand the same things, you have to understand the jumps between them.
Yeah, and that's what I say. I say the 70s became quite different from the 60s. The baby boomers started snorting cocaine and going to Studio 54 or becoming a punk musician. They got depressed in the 70s because they thought the desired revolutions of the 60s didn't succeed. McLuhan said the baby boomers went from glow to glum. Remember, the Kent State University shootings happened on May 4th, 1970, and the students got nervous and scared. More violence started to happen. So how do I go, remember, the Kent State University shootings happened on May 4th, and the students got nervous and scared. More violence started to happen. So I'm taking timely journalistic statements that were said all over the culture in the early 70s, I'm quoting cliches here, and I'm saying apply that to what you just read McLuhan said about the constant espionage. So then go back up to the quote. So this parenthesis, I'm saying today that the tech body is parenthesis quadrupled. It's really claustrophobic now, and it's not like these weird satellites out in the space are framing Earth. We have the frame in your home, in your mind, in your being. That's how intimate the framing, the parenthesis has happened. That's Heidegger's word, framing. What does he mean by that word? Do you know?
Yes, he means the denial of parentheses, right? Parentheses seem to be a frame, right? They seem to block out a phrase or a clarification or something. But what McLuhan means by parentheses is something like what Heidegger means by framing. That is to say that framing needs to be seen to point beyond itself.
And I call that homeopathic. That's exactly what I mean. It becomes more and more invisible, the parenthesis. It's no longer the proscenium arch by the 80s. And then that becomes an art form, so they start talking about Star Wars. It became invisible, right? So Star Wars became the debate in the 80s as the parenthesis went deeper into maybe immunity problems, AIDS, and the beginning of what we have today with the plague.
Right, so notice that the beginning of Being in Time is a quotation from Plato's dialogue, The Sophist. And in the Sophist at that point, Plato is talking about what he calls the gigantomachia, peritis usias, that is to say, the battle of the gods and the giants. And the battle of the gods and the giants can be thought of as Star Wars. So this notion that that Star Wars are coming into consciousness is a very fertile one if it is understood as at once a papering over, a misunderstanding of Star Wars that points beyond itself internally to the genuine Star Wars. It's a very interesting phenomenon where something becomes conscious in the mode of being unconscious.
Yes. So you have Star Wars becomes the celebrity battles that are within the world of constant surveillance, and they're all surveilling each other, epitomized by People magazine. And so you see what Hollywood, you call the Hollywood the left, but no, it's the most divisive place going because they are the figure, what Barry Neville called figure rather than the ground. And so they are the battle that everybody is projecting on to the use for the military Star Wars. That's the wrong Star Wars construction. The Star Wars is the more and more competition between all the celebrities. So you get into Crossfire in the 80s, endless screaming and yelling at each other, what they later called the culture wars. That's the Star Wars that took over as espionage made everybody uncomfortable. And yet that was the means to Gutenberg wealth, constant surveillance of each other. So, you take the Oscars, there's this whole military campaign to promote your movie a few months before the Oscar ceremony, and people heard more about this over the last 10 years, but it was going on earlier. So the warfare of those that are supposed to put out messages to enlighten, inspire, calm people down, give them role models, are the most violent action in society. The talk shows. So I'm thinking of a pun on Star Wars. Are you thinking of that when you were starting to play with the word Star Wars?
Well, whenever I hear the term Star Wars, I think about it as both a surface phenomenon that distracts and the great topic of world history. So, and it's both. But we've reached a point where Star Wars is either going to kill us because we're playing with a nuclear topic that has enormous power, enormous potentially destructive power to it, or we're going to understand Star Wars for the first time, really understand it, in which case the possibility of solving our problems comes before us.
And so you began by saying Star Wars would kill us. You mean military hardware Star Wars?
Well, it could be, but I mean, there's many other ways in which we're killing ourselves. Human beings no longer have the possibility of information. Right? Our whole information environment exists to deny the possibility of information. And so human beings may just become some sort of animal species that hasn't killed itself militarily, but it's killed itself so that human beings are no longer human beings.
Yeah, psychically it's killed themselves. Like Zappa, he was interviewed in the 80s about Star Wars, and he said, Star Wars won't work. The real issue is biological warfare. There's no defenses from that. And Johnny Carson was stunned by this. Oh, wow, he said, that's amazing. Zappa pointed out another technological frontier that was unfolding that Star Wars did not address. So that would be the plagues which we have today.
Yeah, I mean, the power that human beings have and think that they control, of course, that's false. But the power that human beings are exposed to and that is given over to them is a power of total control. But that total control if it's exercised without understanding, is a control of death.
Yeah, so we have here this section we quoted is a description of surveillance capitalism. That's the new code word from that writer out of Harvard, that woman, about the turn in 2012 with the Facebook, Google, and them starting to exchange hyper exchange of nothing, but calling it useful information about people and trying to make patterns out of it. You know, so that when McLuhan says information itself becomes the largest business in the world, gee, that's Silicon Alley. But nobody had one image of that at all in 1970. But
yes, but notice how there's different readings of that. So when something is the biggest industry, that can be thought of in terms of media conglomerates and the CIA and all of that sort of stuff, or it can be thought of as what is prior to human beings and to which they are subjected as human beings. And so understanding media can be taken in the former sense, and McLuhan was perfectly willing to talk about it in the former sense, but what he was talking about was an attempt to clarify the latter sense, the idea that there are shapes that he already called the trivium back in 1943. There are shapes that are prior to human being, and if humans are to understand that being that they are, they need to understand those prior shapes. And the word prior there is key, because that indicates the need to go back to the beginning and start again from the beginning with those shapes. And that's the great question that hangs over human beings right now. Are they going to use those shapes to destroy themselves, or are they going to subject themselves to those shapes to understand themselves?
What's an example of a shape that was prior to human?
Media. So if we look at it in terms of McLuhan's career, what he deals with in his Nash thesis are the three forms of the trivium that shape from the start the different ways of education, the different ways of self-understanding between the year 500 BC, or actually 400 BC, and 1600. So 2,000 years of self-understanding is described by McLuhan in his thesis as the play of three different forms of conceptuality. And that thesis then forms a kind of ground that he then probes for the almost 40 years left of his life.
Yeah, so these divisions, there's the medieval and then the mercantilism takes over, are really barriers to understanding what's all available. And you can see that's what Joyce tried to show with Phineas Wake. He dumped all cultural information in the same big now. And
exactly. Now, I was actually going to say exactly what you just said. And it relates to what we were saying earlier about McLuhan research. If humans try to understand their being, their fate, in linear terms, you can't get anywhere. Yeah. And that's what all of the sciences show. All of the sciences show that you need to begin with forms that do not have history in that sense. So in chemistry, you have the elements. The elements don't have a history. They are what is always there and gets expressed. Or in DNA, the forms of possible DNA configuration are always there. And so the understanding or the laws in physics, for example. The understanding anything in these various fields needs to be able to start with forms that do not have a history, and then understand our history, the history of the planet, in terms of those ahistorical forms. And that's really the trick. How do you come back from linearity to synchronicity? How do we, in understanding our own understanding, how do we come back from linearity, from the attempt to get somewhere, to an understanding of where we've already come from?
And McLuhan's answer was 20th century art has to be a collage.
Yeah, or it already is a collage.
Right.
Whether it knows it or not.
Right.
And that collage implicates borders, right? In order to have a collage, you have to have difference. In order to have difference, you need to have parentheses. And so in the passage that you're reading from Cliché and Archetype, he's saying that the whole earth is parenthesized. The whole earth is a collage. And until human beings understand the limitation inside themselves, the limitation that is built into them as a collage, then they really can't understand anything, and they can destroy themselves through that lack of understanding.
Right. So you have do your own thing in Cliché Archetype, and you go to the next quote, which is from Take Today. So a couple years later, this is from pages 294 and 295 in Take Today. Now listen to this.
And we should point out to people, this is the very end of Take Today.
Yes.
This is not the very last words, but it's almost the last words.
Yeah, it's the second last pages. I think it ends in 296, 297. Mm-hmm. So look at this quote. He says, "Many may think that we are now safely ensconced inside a utopian kingdom like Rabelais' Abbey of Theleme, the fantastic world of do as you like. There it is. Now the global theater prompts you to do your thing. Now it is a fantastic world of do as you like. Doing your own thing has become exaggerated. In fact, we have now to replace nature itself, remaking it as an art form perfectly accommodated to the totality of human needs and aspirations. Such an enterprise requires nothing less than inclusive awareness of human resources and limitations." That's your point, limitations.
Yep. Yep.
Man-made nature, fashioned according to life as art, may tax human creativity far beyond anything levied on pre-satellite man. So he's saying the man-made nature is going to be more creative than human.
Yep. And notice how you're circling back. All of these quotes, to me, are very, very interesting in that they themselves form a collage.
Yeah.
So this quote goes very well with the end of War and Peace and Global Village, because there he's talking about the need for humans to become outbreeders.
Yep.
And you've just read a passage of the need for human creativity to go far beyond pre-satellite man.
Yeah, Gutenberg creativity, way beyond Gutenberg creativity.
That's right.
Which are the celebrities that I was taking that are the figures of the Star Wars. All these old Gutenberg arts of creativity.
Yeah.
They're obsolete arts. The poor kids, right. they have no clue.
Notice that obsolete relates to limitation and parentheses. Right? There's nothing wrong with something being obsolete so long as you understand the power of its limitation.
Right, and also that more and more people are doing it. It's becoming cliche. That's what obsolescence means.
Yeah.
So he then says, having engineered into existence this giant rim spin around all human transactions. So we have a new term for the global theater, the rim spin. We now have to discover the means of adjusting the speed of this spin in order to accommodate the responsive spins of all the components. Now, who the heck even dared to see how you would do that? They never read the sentence, but what a demand he's making. This is the new creativity required. You have to discover them. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, what I find particularly interesting in a sentence like this is I don't think that McLuhan himself really knew what he was talking about. He and Barry, but not because they were dumb or blind in some sense. They were talking beyond themselves.
Their reach is exceeding their grasp. The metaphor.
That's right. Absolutely. So you can see what he's saying here in terms that you were just explicating. That is to say, kind of indicating the future and what had to be understood. But it can also be understood backwards as being an attempt to encapsulate what is at stake in the whole history of the world.
Yeah. So, quite amazing statements, and you can see that nobody knew how to deal with them. Northrop Frye didn't deal with them. Nobody looked at it. That's as I've said 1,000 times. I went to the coach house, and you brought up any of this stuff. They said, "Oh, no, I haven't read that. I don't know. Boy, McLuhan's far out. I don't know what he's talking about there." And that was it. And that's what disappointed you. There was nothing going on there. You felt, but I don't know if you would have seen the McLuhan words. Did you see Cliched Archetype when it came out in 1970? Did you?
When I was talking with Marshall, I had not read Cliched Archetype for sure. So that's one of the things that makes me think that I probably was speaking to him in 67 or 68.
Right. Okay, so then the quote continues. As concert master, now he's got a new term, satellite man. As concert master, satellite man's a concert master, would have to audition such selections as the Manhattan Project, that's the World War II atomic bomb project, with exquisite prescience of audience effects. They had to do this. Today, they had to redo the Manhattan Project with more concentration on the effects of it, whereas the actual making of the bomb, the Manhattan Project, was focused on one kind of effect, and that's all that should be done. And the audience be damned, we're going to affect it. They weren't looking at how the audience would survive that new technology. And what would that mean? Maybe you'd get bombed on another level. Your institutions would collapse as the satellites took over. So the Manhattan Project, like Star Wars, was aimed at the wrong problem, or the inadequate problem.
Right, but I would rather say that it can be mistaken as indicating the wrong problem, or it can be taken as indicating the right problem. And the dialectic between the wrong taking and the right taking is the great question.
Yeah, now here's something that's coming up. So he says the audience of Satellite Man includes the actors. There we are, Star Wars. The audience of Satellite Man includes the actors, and that's in quote, and is not merely human, but consists of all the resonances awakened everywhere. Everything becomes an actor. Satellite Man no longer inhabits visual space, but a resonating acoustic space whose boundaries are nowhere. Today he is an information hunter in Ecoland. What is the main word, the main scandal that's striking? It's sort of dominating the edges of how much you dare investigate it. Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden. What a name. Remember how McLuhan said your name made you big? There's probably been other politicians' sons who never had the word Hunter in their name, but when you come up with Hunter Biden, you've got the icon for what everybody's doing to themselves, the global espionage.
Yeah, that's right. So that's a very good example of how everything is twofold. So you have a guy that's completely out of his head, and that has the potential to destroy the world, especially the local world. But at the same time, he points beyond himself to something that's very important.
Yeah.
And everything is that twofold. And in order to understand that twofold, you have to understand the parentheses or the border or the limitation between them. And that is the great demand that we're up against. Are we going to be able to understand the limitation through which understanding arises, or are we going to destroy ourselves by denying it? If we look at Germany right now, Germany's up against the choice of either going along with the United States, going along with a certain notion of virtue by cutting off oil and gas from Russia, or they're going to see through the limitations of NATO and of their own need and desire to be virtuous. And that question is hanging over Germany now in a way that it may commit suicide, or it may reach a new understanding of the world. And we don't know what's going to happen there. It's hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
But that choice that it's facing is what McLuhan is describing here, and what you are saying by replaying this passage.
Yes. What is it? Limitations and going back up. Resources and limitations. The interplay is tactility. So I made
Correct.
a big discovery last night, and I ran it by Clinton and them, and they were kind of stunned. So listen to this. When McLuhan talks about tactility, he's saying that's not a sense. That's the interplay of the senses. All that we mean by virtual reality is McLuhan's tactility. Virtual reality is something you can't touch. It's not a sense, right?
Well, not only that, it comes from a limitation, right? Virtual reality is the expression of the digital.
Yes.
So virtual reality begins with the digital form, and the digital form is the back and forth of the electric that can only exist by having a border between the poles, the negative and positive poles.
Yeah. So we didn't need the word virtual reality. Only the Gutenberg merchants needed it to make as if we're gone somewhere. No, McLuhan had already encompassed it by emphasizing tactility in all the 20th century technologies. He was pointing to the new virtual reality. So that's never been said before. What do you think of that? That his tactility is virtual. Is the word virtual?
Yes. Tonight or this morning we've been talking a lot about limitation, parentheses, and
new creativity.
That's right. But within virtuality, you have this dynamic of something that wants to present itself as the encompassing, but properly understood, it's what releases from the encompassing.
Yeah.
And that's the great question. Are human beings going to put on these helmets or whatever the things are called that you put on to live in a virtual reality?
Yeah, make it metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. Are we going to live in a metaverse that is the end of human being, or are we going to understand virtuality as something that human beings have always lived in? That's correct. All of the different cultures have always been virtual realities.
Yeah, when Terence McKenna talked about you get to 2012 and the world blows up from too much novelty, he was reading McLuhan, but novelty, he didn't need to use the word novelty. Just go back to what McLuhan was saying on page 190, what we're discussing. See, that's why you don't get any real new creativity, because McLuhan has a world monopoly on it.
Well,
he's more creative than anybody about the issues that we're involved in. Not that you parrot McLuhan, but you have to understand how close he did become the world monopoly. and bragged about it. He's the Center for Culture and Technology.
Right. So, I mean, McLuhan was involved in many, many different attempts to communicate. And one of those ways was to sort of amplify himself in an absurd way.
Yeah.
So he's not saying, I'm the greatest prophet that ever lived. He's saying, look at all of the great prophets and see how stupid they are.
Yeah, it was easy to take over the field.
Correct. And which he already pointed out in letters to his Jesuit friends back in the 40s.
Yeah.
McLuhan says, it's very easy to become famous and to more or less take over the world if you are properly grounded. And finally, starting around 1960, McLuhan says, well, I guess I'll try that avenue. I'm going to become famous.
It's a probe.
Yeah.
That transcript of his meeting with the board of the University of Toronto in '69, where they're talking about what to do, and they mentioned something. He says, well, Marshall said, I tried that. Didn't work. This is at the end of the 60s. Have you ever seen that? That transcript?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Isn't
I posted it.
Yeah. I just have a vague memory of it, and does that come from the President's report?
Something like that, yeah.
1970? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So I know what you're talking about for sure.
Yeah, what's funny is he's talking among his, quote, equals, his colleagues in the university. And they've retreated at the end of the 60s, and they're saying, what do we do with all these students and this uproar? And then they come up with some suggestions, and McLuhan says, yeah, well, I already did that. That didn't work. He's admitting he was a failure to them. And they all crack up and start laughing. That's like a meeting of the mafia, you know what I mean? And they're laughing about who got killed and who didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and this has replayed itself with Jordan Peterson and the University of Toronto.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. What is it about the University of Toronto that fosters this? It is the fact that Canada's in the interval. I always say it's the interval. It's the new Switzerland of the solar government. It's the new interval position. Remember Switzerland was the
Trudeau and Freeland are trying to give up as quickly as they can.
Who's the second person? Trudeau and
Freeland. Freeland, Christian.
Oh,
Freeland.
yeah. The Nazi people. Yeah, the Nazis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But Canada is the nowhere place, no identity, because it's in the interval. It's virtual. So maybe Canada was the first virtual culture, if you mean by that tactile. Mm-hmm. Not in the Thailander way of being tactile, but second nature tactility.
Right. But notice when you say first there, it's difficult to understand what first means.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean first in a linear sequence, because if all cultures have always been virtual, which they have been, if all cultures have always been expressions of tactility, then there's nothing that was first about Canada as embodying
what Canada
those forces.
Canada was recognized to be the country, beginning with Lester Pearson, to work in the interval, to be the peacemaker, to be the...
That's right. So
no country was like that before, I don't think. Maybe there were, but not in any popular awareness. Canada had a unique position, which is what McLuhan acted out in the world of thought and academia. He was the interval man that nobody could put a finger on. He was the ultimate Canadian. And he writes about Canada is the greatest artist in the 60s. The idea of Canada, whatever we thought Canada was, that was the great artist. And there's a book, there's a new book, came out a few years ago, Counterblasting Canada, and this art professor, Mr. Betts, B-E-T-T-S, he does a good article pointing that out. I've never seen anybody look at McLuhan's engagement with the art world and see there was a whole new level that John Cage and these guys didn't know about, that McLuhan was talking. Betts does get to that point that Canada was the anti-environment to the world, which was largely the American environment.
Mm-hmm. And that's precisely what Canada has given up.
Yes, but, Canada didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't listen to McLuhan. They didn't get the question. They didn't understand their role.
If understanding sort of takes off from that point, as if what was needed is to go back to the unique, quote unquote, unique or first time role of Canada, that is a Gutenbergian understanding.
Yeah.
Because it's necessary to
Pearson
understand.
Was the Gutenberg. Pearson was the Gutenberg. Marshall was the Marconi.
Yeah, but you see, in the global theater in Star Wars, it's not that the one takes over from the other. The one is more powerful than the other. Those are media, capital M media, and they are always in interplay. So that gets rid of any notion of being the first or being the great exemplary or anything like this.
When you say unique, Canada was a unique new image for a nation. So, but listen to this. When they were organizing to give McLuhan the Order of Canada in 1970, what was going on in Parliament? Governor General Vanier was saying McLuhan has to be policed, ignored. He's ruining the children. In other words, he was being honored and vilified at the same time.
Right.
Which is what I see as translates to your point that he had two roles going.
Uh-huh.
As a counter to Pearson's specialist role, a literal negotiator, peacemaker. And then Trudeau did, with, greatly influenced by McLuhan, Trudeau made the Pearson position a little more interesting. He had the McLuhan level, which then made McLuhan lose his identity and have all these heart attacks and brain surgery. Trudeau had hijacked him. Remember he had all these health problems from 1969 on? Every couple of years.
Yeah. It's like he was, his understanding was untimely.
Yeah.
And so he had to pay for it.
Yes, and the son of McLuhan is Trudeau, not Eric. In Nova Scotia, I used to go around saying I was the son of McLuhan, the one that the society wouldn't recognize. I remember meeting Barbara Frum. She was doing a book deal in mid-'70s or something. She came to the local bookstore, and I was talking to her, and I always brought up McLuhan to everybody because that was a hidden ground. And she goes, well, I'm not sure what he's doing now. He's talking about angels. And, when you knew what angels was, these people who were writing books, they were so ridiculous. They had no clue what was going on, which made them, quote, successful and saleable.
Sure. Well, look what's happened to her son, right?
Oh, my God, that guy, he's in a bad way, that guy.
That's right. But what he's expressing is the ground of his mother's insights, as to say that she was not able to be virtuous and informative as she was attempting to do on the basis of the ground that she had.
Yeah.
And so the son then pulls the curtain away from that ground and shows what it was, and it's laughable.
And he becomes a Mulroney. I was thinking if Trudeau was McLuhan, kept himself in the interval, then they failed. He failed, and then they failed to be the great artists of the anti-environment of America. So then Mulroney and the rest of them, under free trade, merged with America. They became Americans.
Right. Absolutely.
And David Frum leaves Canada and goes to consults with all the anti-Trumpers.
Yeah. So it's really you have a country, Canada, that was unable to sort of enter into its fate. And that fate was described not only by McLuhan, but people like Fry, people like Innes described aspects of it as well.
Conrad Black, name any figure in Canada. They all failed.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Black is a guy that's a little bit like Frum. He's an American intellectual.
Yeah, and with a British lord.
Yeah.
he tried to make an overlay of more than one, moving towards quadrophenia.
Correct.
And then he ends up defending Trump in the National Post. What a ridiculous fate on content level. I think he's good. He's good anti-environment to Canadians on his Trump point, but he probably doesn't understand how he got there or what it really means to what his role is. Meanwhile, I'm keeping Trump alive with my products so that Black can have something to write about.
What do you think is going to happen in terms of the next election? Do you think Trump is going to be a candidate or not?
No, he's going to become viceroy of the new feudal situation. and what we may not get as things heat up, as the Democrats try to get rid of Biden and create all kind of crisis with that, and then Putin drops a nuclear suitcase in Warsaw, and then the BA.T2 virus starts killing millions of people. It's already happening over there. There's going to be so much chaos over the next few months that I think the midterms might be canceled. And in that chaos, we'll have a constitutional convention, or at least a convention of governors, and that's when Trump will step in and usher in a new feudal arrangement with him as viceroy.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Democrats would certainly love to get rid of the midterms, so let's see.
Yeah, they want to get rid of Biden. Who says that? Somebody calls Biden is Biden, run by Obama.
Yeah.
So these are the ridiculous celebrities, and the people don't recognize the powers they have. These kids, these mothers are trying to object to a certain kind of education that's going on, but they don't have a counter program. They just have reaction.
Mm-hmm.
They can't act. So that'll fail. Everybody will fail in their agenda. I mean, look at Biden. Hey, this guy's going to correct the error of Trump, right? He creates a worse error because and it's been that way for 50 years since Eisenhower.
Well, it's been that way forever. That's what it means to be a human being. Human beings, at the end of the day, human beings can only fail.
Right.
Everybody's right. So.
And that's what McLuhan says in Take Today. No success like failure.
Correct.
And he says every remedy better than the next. Every remedy better than the next.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got this, theater of the absurd going on, which is what McLuhan called the global theater. So I say, after reading what I just read, Constant Master and all that, my Bob Howard Cosell commentary on his own collage, I say, McLuhan predicts the writings of people like Carlos Castaneda. These are the people embracing dolphins and whales because, quote, resonances are awakened everywhere, unquote. But everybody's inside the effect of the ascending arch created by the satellites. And then I had, quote, as Concert Master, Satellite Man would have to audition such selections as thee, and I have end of quote. And I say, in other words, if you were going to make an atomic bomb, which was the Manhattan Project, a project that researched and developed nuclear weapons during World War II, in 44 to 45, you wouldn't be able to do that by 1970. You'd have to run it by the ecologists in Congress, who are under this new paranoia that the world was turning into a weird new situation called a global theater. A new sensitivity was afoot. Then I have a quote, Satellite Man no longer inhabits visual space, but a resonating acoustic space whose boundaries are nowhere. Today he is an information hunter in Ecoland. Then I say, the unstructured and gradeless school of electric information succeeds to the bureaucratic and fragmented school based on the classifications of print technology. In the same way, hardware economics based on a money-oriented market is succeeded by the new knowledge industries. That's tactility. That's virtual. This revolution is, and so they don't know how to translate that into wealth, or to call a new, make a new definition of the new wealth that is virtual. This revolution is long past, but is still managed as if it were going to take place in the year 2001. For the comprehensivist, it is the noise of the total environment that he must now convert into the program of his global theater. So then I say, very big statements here, big vistas and landscapes that McLuhan was talking about. He's proposing the running of the global environment the way the central banks run the economy. But they were a puny operation, running visual space and money, compared to these massive environments that were having huge effects that nobody even noticed. There's your macro connubule. Or if they noticed them, they didn't know what was causing them. Now, I'm moving along. I never did this before. You move from one quote to the next. So let's go to the next one. From the letters, 1987. McLuhan says, today with electronics we have discovered that we live in a global village and the job is to create a global city, capital letters, C-I-T-Y, as center for the village margins. The parameters of this task are by no means positional. So again, he's describing page 190 of War and Peace in the Global Village. With electronics, any marginal area can become center, and marginal experiences can be had at any center. Perhaps the city needed to coordinate in concert the distracted sense programs of our global village will have to be built by computers in the way in which a big airport has to coordinate multiple flights. Now that's going into your interior landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Build a global village interior.
But you continue to pick out quotations here which are all echoes of each other.
Yeah, yeah.
If people wanted to understand what's going on in your book, reading these quotations and letting them bounce off each other is a very good way to go about it.
Yeah, and remember the cover of Cliched Archetype was this repeating font. Cliched Archetype. He kept trying to show an echo visually.
Mm-hmm.
Remember? That's how the cover was designed. Yeah, so and it's like McLuhan said about himself, I'm painting surrealistic landscapes. That's what I'm doing here. But I'm using the module, the single unit, and like I guess Chinese. The Chinese ideogram has multiple resonances, nuances, right, and meanings.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So that's the difference between literacy and not literacy.
You don't mean media literacy, do you?
No, I mean you're talking about the Chinese ideogram.
Yeah.
And so what is that? That's not a letter.
Right.
Right. And so the literacy is defined by the letter, and the ideogram is defined by not being a letter.
And that's how I compose this. I have a pretty good memory of all these quotes. So I got a quote, and then I said, holy shit, and I got dragged along, like down a river. Oh, there's another one. That's the same thing. Oh, look, the same thing's over here. Grab that. So my mind would race along book to book and grab them and make a quick note. Then I had to go back and type them all up and make this collage.
Right. Exactly. So that's how McLuhan thought and how McLuhan wrote and how McLuhan spoke, I believe.
Yeah.
Right? Because this hip hop, this dancing back and forth, is how thinking works. That's
right. That's the way thinking is. And so you have, the Kirchhoff Skin of Culture, Logan's The Fifth Language, all these books these different people were putting out. And they were trying to be linear about the latest gadgets that were coming out of the McLuhan, out of the antique shop. Remember, the guy walks into the antique shop and he asked somebody what he got. What's the latest? And the guy says, "It's not out yet." So I remember, like all of a sudden, I remember all my knowledge of McLuhan would explode in my head, and he says, and I understand immediately, that he would grab whatever was nearby to make his pattern, his inventory. That's what I was doing in organizing this.
Yeah, And and you could say, what's nearby? What's nearby is everything in the macrocosm.
Yes.
What's nearby is Star Wars. And the need is to kind of process that in the interior landscape, and then what gets put out is different from the input, but it's one more attempt in this long history of human beings to
Another failed.
indicate.
I failed again. You say macro. What was McLuhan's nickname? Mac.
That's right. Good point.
Macro Canubian. I'm sure he meant that in there. That's why he picked the word. So here we have the computers are coordinating the multiple flights. So then I say, this is a good, nice collage. You're reading along, and I'm saying what I'm saying. Also, they go, McLuhan was speaking or telling the intelligence agency of the world what they're really supposed to do. No, nobody ever said that's who he was consulting, right? That's pretty good. He was telling the intelligence agencies of the world what they're really supposed to do. Not their silly skirmishes fighting communists or capitalists. McLuhan was laying out what a comprehensive CIA would do. They'd be allowed to take over the world because you would have the computers and a new knowledge and awareness of an expert, a team of experts that could run the world. Remember, he proposed that in '64 when he was unveiling the huge new center. And he said, we can run the world via advertising in 5 years.
Yeah, so but what needs to be understood there is that he's not proposing that you have a kind of
new president or prime minister.
That's right. It's instead what needs to sort of happen to the world is to understand the forms that it's subject to, and then for the world to organize itself as a classroom without walls.
Yeah, so just what I was going to say. He said that people should have run their elections out of a TV studio. They didn't have to travel around, shaking babies and stuff. Just have a casual discussion of the issues once a week on TV among the candidates, and see
Absolutely.
And so then, if you became whoever won, they would continue that. If I was president, I would, or prime minister or whatever, I would have a few people around and discuss, using McLuhan's language, the issues of the day. That's all we do to govern, would be to show people what they should attempt to understand.
Yeah, and let them vote from their living rooms on which of the positions that are being discussed that they want to fund.
Yeah.
Right? It's ridiculous for human beings all over the planet are paying taxes to government, either income tax or the taxes on their commercial transactions, but everybody is paying huge amounts to governments in order to make the world less safe for their children. It's ridiculous. But that's what we're doing. That's what human beings have come to.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to try to make the world as shitty as we can.
That's right.
Wonderful.
It's so irresponsible that if I ever get any clout, there's going to be a lot of scolding coming from me. So I'm there. What do I say here? Well, this is Lee Beland. May 7th. When that 1964, when he laid out the plans for this huge Center for Culture and Technology, he and Daniel Capon were planning stuff, and it was in May '64. I think Understanding Media had just come out. So some Toronto Daily Star journalist, Lee Beland, says he sees planner's paradise. And here's what the journalist says. If University of Toronto professor Marshall McLuhan is right, and if he gets the money, he figures that within 5 years, quote, Madison Avenue could rule the world. Can you imagine people reading this? Your Barry Callahans, your local beatnik poet said, what the hell, McLuhan's gone fascist, What? Madison Avenue could rule the world? In turn, governments could manage the national economy, quote, as easily as adjusting the thermostat in the living room. So there he was in '64. He was ready to say that 7 years before that, and then he got the opportunity. because the book showed up. So then he had a reason to be interviewed, and he had his plan that he'd been saying since 1950 that we arrived in 1984 and 1934.
Yeah. So this is one more attempt to try to get people to understand the dialogue that they were already in.
Yeah, that they were living and acting out.
Correct. It didn't work, but
it was a great effort.
Yeah, he wasn't the only one that's failed in the history of the world.
That's right. And then I explained the city, the big letters, CITY, in the 1987 letter. We have to create a global city.
Yeah, in the 1960 letter.
No, this is 1987. There's a 1961, but this is 1987. He repeats it.
Well, 1980. I mean, he's.
Oh no! I screwed up.
Yeah.
You're right. I'm looking at the date of the book. Yeah. No, which is, I was saying, I said, well, what? They only did it once. So how'd they do that? Yeah, This is 1960, and then
correct.
He gets
so
to.
In 1960, what McLuhan is coming to is the idea that although individual people, if they are to achieve understanding, need to have a certain basis, that basis is not the same thing as the meteorologic environment in which we live. So there's a strange kind of dialectic that he tried to explain in 1959 to the seminarians at St. Michael's.
Yes.
Where he says, on the one hand, you have the need for individual basis, but on the other hand, the individual basis is caught up in a world environment. And what we have to do as Catholics or as academics or just as human beings is we have to try to come to an understanding of those two things and how they belong together. And that's a huge project, but it represents a very interesting step in the tradition of human beings trying to understand what's at stake in their being.
And he almost didn't survive that insight. This is coming out.
Correct.
He's writing after his whatever hospital situation he was put into earlier in 1960.
That's right. So Corinne has a note in letters about his blackouts starting in 1959.
Right. So, meanwhile, Lee Beelan, the journalist, he's got a nice story to write about some maniac that thinks we could turn the thermostat into a living room. He certainly doesn't jump aboard. He goes on to his next story the next day, a totally different item. Doesn't stick with McLuhan. He didn't quit his job and join him. So this city would not be some geographical chemical body place, because now I sneak my words in. This city that we're sort of concretizing the virtual tactility, this city would not be some geographical chemical body place because actual cities in rural areas were getting scattered and decentralized. No more New York City dominance because magazines were everywhere on the highways. Anybody could be anywhere to pick up New York culture in the magazine world in quotes. So the city had to be a software program. McLuhan began to explore tetrad management and programming. He says he wants to take over the global thermostat, program the environment, and create a computerized city, a database that would locate patterns. Then, quote, oops, too much radio in Venezuela. We've got to turn off the radio and hype up the newspapers to balance off the turmoil in Venezuela. End of quote. In other words, program the old analog media with a computer documenting sensory thresholds. He laid that out in the mid-'60s. He had a couple of computer experts trying to measure the sensory thresholds of populations. It was hard to do. They tried it, but it didn't work. It was just too big. And what nation is going to allow one to modulate their media environment? When one suggested the program to governments, they said, "That's fascism, Mr. McLuhan." They thought McLuhan was a fascist, but he was doing this to protect people. They didn't know they needed protection until recently. So there's the city, turning the global village theater into an art form. Go back up to that quotation on the new despotism at the beginning of the global theater section. Page 88. Global village theater, in quotes, meant harnessing the satellite technology of the 60s to turn the global village into an art form. At least that was McLuhan's dream, probe, or proposal, to create a virtual city, which I would then now say tactile city. There was no city in the global theater at that time. There were just scattered villages and megalopolized media environments. Now, there was a city in the global theater, but you had to create whatever he was going to create to show people it existed already.
Yes, that's right. So they, in that sense of city, the pre-existing city can be said to be Star Wars,
yes.
Or it can be said to be media. It's the demand placed on human understanding to understand their macrocosmic environment.
Connubium.
Yes.
So you get to the top of 94, and I say the same thing again in a different way. I take a quote from Counterblast, 1969, page 64. The bias of our culture, McLuhan said, is precisely to isolate the bias of all others in an effort at orchestration. Social connubium? Question mark. There's that word again.
Yep. That's right. And the word orchestration points back to Siegfried Gideon that McLuhan met in 1943, the same year that he met Wyndham Lewis.
Yeah.
And at the start of McLuhan's sort of engagement with Gideon is the idea that the world is an orchestra that can play harmoniously, but at the moment, all of the different musicians are in soundproof rooms and can't hear each other.
Is that a quote from Gideon?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And the McLuhan takes over this notion of the need for orchestration.
Yeah.
In the sense of musicians, aka cultures, need to be able to hear each other. And you've just had a quotation from a letter in 1960 where he talks about centers and margins. So instead of cultures understanding themselves as centers to which all other cultures are marginal, McLuhan says, no, we need to understand all cultures in terms of a center and margin environment where those can flip. Just like figure and ground can flip, so can center and margin.
Yeah.
And that flipping is conversation, or is dialogue, or is dialectic. And so the harmonization that would take place in what he calls an effort of orchestration is the attempt to allow the dialogue of cultures to regulate how human beings go about their business.
Right. So the tendency to make this a new world order, I correct that and say it was already a dream of the Bucky Fullers in the United Nations to organize a global village into some sophisticated system, but it was usually a model of, quote, world government, unquote. For McLuhan, it was a computer program. He announced this in May 64 when he released Understanding Media. He said, quote, we're going to program sensory thresholds of whole populations. Within 5 years, with the help of Madison Avenue, we will rule the whole world. So he was quoting from Understanding Media to the journalists when he talked about Madison Avenue in 5 years. We will rule the whole world. Now, isn't this an interesting way to put on everybody? That's what he said in his, this is what he meant by being the center of culture and technology. That's what he said in his press conference. Unfortunately, nobody even noticed the article. See the Lee Balin article above. I say probably. Nobody noticed it. Although he had nice pictures and charts in the Toronto newspaper. Who knows what people thought? They were distracted by the Beatles, who had just shown up on the Ed Sullivan Show a few months before. So then we get to another quote, Howard Locke Gossage. What was once fresh, and how that's the so-called advertising guy who claimed to make McLuhan famous. And Ted Carpenter writes about it at the back of Don Thiel's book. He witnessed the machinations of Mr. Gossage out of San Francisco. And so he did an article, You Can See Why the Mighty Would Be Curious. And he tried to get the mighty's attention, and he did, for McLuhan. Yeah. So my commentary is...
McLuhan laid out this program years before.
Yes.
So I think McLuhan used Gossage, not Gossage used McLuhan.
That's right. And Don Thiel, he's very valuable for what he experienced. As a graduate student, 50 to 53, 54, he said McLuhan was always talking about taking over power and puzzling about how he'd do it. But Don heard him thinking about it out loud in the early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
That Don didn't understand it. He was too young. But later, when McLuhan, 10 years later, is doing this kind of understanding media stuff, Don remembered what he had said and saw how it had fallen, into
place.
Into place. I was going to say logically, but can't say that. How it resonated appropriately with what he had already been saying.
Right.
So Gossage comes along and has an interesting pattern. He says, what was once fresh and new turns into a cliche and assumes its role as part of the environment. Now let's suppose that when you repaper the room, you decide to save a square of the old stuff and have it framed. As a picture, it is no longer wallpaper, but content for the new environment. Something else has happened too. It has become an art form. If it is successful as an art form and is admired and copied, or at any rate persists so that it eventually becomes the one and only from which all others emanate, it constitutes an archetype. Today's archetype was yesterday's art form, day before yesterday's cliche, and the day before that it was the last word. And I really love that sequence when I read that in 1967 when the book came out. That opened me up and prepared me for a cliched archetype. But it's a very useful little paragraph. One was lucky. I don't know if anybody else read it and got something out of it. Probably didn't. But he offered something there that was pretty good. And
yeah, that's Heraclitus revisited.
Yeah. So then Howard Cosell Dobbs comes in and he says, in the global theater, you have a rapid series of successive innovations as air, sats, anti-environment. So there can't be an anti-environment unless you turn it off. There can be a fake anti-environment unless you want to think fake is good enough, because McLuhan once was accused of just dealing in half-truths. And he said, well, a half-truth is a lot of truth for most people. So there's no problem being an air, sats, anti-environment. In the global theater, you have a rapid series of successive innovations as air, sats, anti-environment. They become a cliche archetypal turnover. Gossage is describing an introduction to that pattern. This is the global theater phase. Things become cliches and then archetypes, and then they become new cliche probes. This is a turnover of technologies which are rapidly becoming cliches and archetypes because the only thing that comes in is computers. And Clinton Ignatov will complain today, quote, computers haven't changed in 40 years. I just met Clinton around the time I did this. Nobody has really come up with a new breakthrough beyond our present software computer layout. They're just accessorizing or making it faster. We're all Luddites. We can't take any newness. So I'm explaining why they don't change the computers. Not like we could in the 19th century. It was considered progress in the 19th century, but in the 70s and 80s, quote, no more progress, shut down the nuclear power plants, obviously technology is doing us in, unquote. People are starting to notice the medium is the message on an instinctive paranoid level. They didn't see technology as a beautiful art form like McLuhan did. Then I go back to 1964. Here he is, a couple of years before Gossage comes up with it. Gossage heard Marshall saying it. That's where he got it, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But here's McLuhan laying it out in 64. TV as the latest archetype. It's already archetypal. The latest archetypal environment or technology is very much in this disheveled phase, says McLuhan. The movie remained in such a disheveled phase for decades. Whether Telstar is already, that was a new satellite program, whether Telstar is already a new archetypal environment that assumes the present TV form as its content will appear fairly soon. Nobody dealt with that one. That got lost. The jury's out still on that point. Did Telstar become a new archetypal environment that assumes the present TV form as its content?
Sure. Well, Telstar was a satellite, and as excuse me, as McLuhan has been talking in all of these quotations about a satellite environment, and the questions that poses. So he is again here. How are we to understand archetype and cliche in terms of the macrocosmic environment?
Yeah, and that's...
Right, so you could say that for human beings, there is a single question, and that is they have a limited lifetime and limited understanding, and they're in an unlimited environment. And can the limitations of human beings come to terms with that unlimited environment? And if human beings can come to terms with them, how do they do it, and what would that represent? And all of these quotations that you're picking out of his works keep repeating that single question.
Yeah, he could, and so you're right that he saw it in 57, or he saw it in 53.
Yeah.
And then new noise would come in, and he'd incorporate the new noise and overlay it or repaint the same picture.
Yeah.
Like abstract artists were doing.
Correct. It's like rats in a maze. All you can do is see what the choice is at any juncture, and then you have to take one, and you go to the next part of the maze, and then there's another juncture. And that's what human beings do.
Yeah, so say that again. You're in the maze, and what do you do?
Well, you come to a junction, and then you have to decide which of the possible turns do I make.
Right.
And that's what McLuhan was doing. That's what we all do. The maze is the set of limitations to which we are constrained. And all we can do is try to make our way through that labyrinth.
Yeah, so Andy Warhol, he's starting to have the factory, and he's just filming people sitting around being humans. And McLuhan was doing it so much more articulately. Warhol was just getting it by instinct. But Marshall was not inside instinct. He said, well, of course Warhol gets attention. He's a figure for what I'm talking about. And I'm not stuck in what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was I going to say? These quotes you would never know. Oh, yeah, this is what I wanted to say. So here I am trying to describe the new environment, and I'm ransacking the past of Marshall McLuhan and finding quotes that no one noticed, nobody had paid any attention to help lead to an understanding of the tech body. The work had already been done by McLuhan. So this is a great achievement I'm making of showing how McLuhan was illustrating the new ground, which is what's going to be later the punch line of the essay. So I tell you, you could have maybe, if you thought like me and wanted to do what I'm doing, the tech body. But I don't know anybody else that knows these quotes. So they certainly haven't shown up in any public forum or called me and told me what they'd done. These are great quotes I'm finding, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think you're just like McLuhan. I think you are talking beyond yourself.
Yeah.
You're hip-hopping between these various quotes, and what you're doing is very, very interesting in a way that requires a revisiting.
Yeah.
Right. What was going on in your brain that was picking out these quotations and ordering them in a collage like this? And that's sort of the interesting question that your book poses.
Right. Where the hell did I get this from? And Queen Elizabeth said that to J.W. a couple of months ago. He said, "How did Bob do this?"
Well,
that's
the Queen
true.
needs to pick up the phone and talk to you, Bob.
Well, a lot of them are saying, "Can we just call up Bob?" And he says, "Yeah." And then he doesn't tell her that usually Bob doesn't answer his phone. But he says, "Yeah, go ahead, Bob will talk to you." Yep. And he says they're all quite nervous. So they'd rather talk to Carolyn. You know, she has something practical, assuage my aches and pains, you know. That's something they can get a grip on. Yeah, it's pretty funny the way JW is my probe. He goes out there, interacts with the Vatican, interacts with the Queen and Trump, and he reports back. I'm always part of the conversation. They are monitoring what we're saying.
So do you regard JW as an ambassador?
Yeah. He says, "Bob, I don't want to be in your position." He's at the factory making new technologies and very happy to do it. But yes, he's trying to get them to have the guts to come over here or to get me on the phone. He kind of laughs that they won't do it, but he keeps telling them, Bob's very easy to talk to. Just call him up. They go, "Oh, no, I don't want to meet the president." You know, just the same nervousness people had when they would meet McLuhan. I was just reading.
Well, I interpret that to mean that people don't want to know that their understanding comes out of their limitation.
Yeah. Yep, they don't want to know. So then I go, okay, after, look at the way, I don't know if I've got this right. Whether Telstar is already a new archetypal environment that assumes the present TV form as its content, whether will appear. The question will be answered, will appear fairly soon. Whether Telstar is it already a new archetypal environment that assumes the present TV form as its content? That issue will appear fairly soon or be resolved. Is that how you read that?
Well, I would say that it's the question that's been left hanging.
Yeah.
I mean, if we ask what does new, NEW, mean in this context, it means the oldest of the old.
Yeah.
So whether or not we're going to be able to come to an understanding of the oldest of the old in a way that is revolutionary, that's the great question, and it's becoming very pointed today.
Well, let's see. I think I say that. So my Bob Cosell says, McLuhan isn't exactly clear about the pace of turnover. When does TV become archetype? In the case of Telstar, the first U.S. satellite launched on July 10th, 1962. The satellite was a novelty, the last word, and then it was cliche, and then it's going to be an art form. When's it going to be an archetype? McLuhan's not sure how fast environments go through this process. Telstar is appearing archetypal. Well, is it actually becoming archetypal? McLuhan says, we'll figure that out soon enough. It will appear as archetype fairly soon, unquote. But he miscalculated worldwide management. He thought management would keep getting obsolesced and give up, resign. McLuhan told me, quote, management managed to hold on and stop the opportunities that new technology was giving. They got their Kissinger and just sat there and said, we aren't moving. You don't run nothing. We run it. And we're still going to fight wars based on nationalism or tribalism. And that's really like today. McLuhan didn't realize they would get away with that stubbornness for so many decades.
Right, even centuries.
Right. So there's the failure you talk about.
That's right. So you have the failure that's the great danger, and you have the failure that's the great opportunity, and that's the situation in which we're situated. Yeah.
So when the internet came in, they all celebrated McLuhan, Wired magazine, and that. No, it should have been, uh-oh, he failed. It's not good that we're gonna reap the benefits of what he saw on the negative side, on the disservice side. In other words, if he failed, we're in trouble. I remember when Zappa failed, when Zappa died, a couple of the musicians in his band who, really respected his work and all that and had great concerts, they said, this is not good. Zappa didn't make it. This is not good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like the scout went ahead and didn't make it. This is the worst part of the Hollywood movie we're in right now. There's no way out. We actually blew it. And it's amazing. You hear people say it all over the place, right?
Right.
They really are despondent.
You used the phrase, there's no way out.
Yeah.
And many discussions ago, we were continually talking about the cul-de-sac.
Yes.
And the labyrinth, and we're coming back to it here. What McLuhan was describing as the choice before human beings back in the 1960s is a question that hasn't really been posed in the 80 years since. We're still in exactly the same spot.
That's right. I used to say on the radio 40 years ago, we're still running on the spot, 1945. We've just been overlaying novelties and information patterns from the same paralysis, 1945, when history had ended, linear history.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So these patterns are the best kind of art that's happening today. To get these
I guess
patterns.
so. That's one thing that I've never really understood with McLuhan is his emphasis on art. I think it was a way of trying to talk about religion and philosophy
in a new way, because the artist wasn't considered in that field.
Correct.
So he took the Gutenberg artists and showed what the importance in the history of philosophy that the academics missed, but he was talking about a new kind of art, not those guys. And that was where you get to the point. He was
talking about making.
Yeah, and he's talking about Canada as an environment was the new artist. You couldn't. He used to complain about Ted Carpenter joined the art world, married whatever that family's name is, and our Marshall said, you don't go to New York. That's a bunch of con men. And so he came up with a way of writing a poem about it, saying Canada is the new art. Now try to sell that. Can you sell Canada as a great artwork, like the Wall Street guys were doing with the old arts? Just to realize what his metaphor, what he was going beyond what he thought he knew, or however you were saying that. He was going beyond his grasp. To grasp that's what he's doing, and to get partly what he's saying is an inspiring art form to inflame the mind.
Correct. So we could say that Canada there is not the literal Canada.
Right.
Just as media are not literal TV, newspapers, radio, etc. Right. So the Canada there is not the literal Canada with certain borders and certain people that are in it. Canada there stands in for the world. Is the world going to be able to come to instantiate intermedia? Yes or no?
Right.
If the world...
And Canada, as the greatest artist, produced a unique politician, Trudeau, which McLuhan said you could never have a Trudeau in the United States. They were too much on the spot with all the issues that they had to take responsibility for, because they were the world managers, the world environment.
So Trudeau himself was a very failed kind of individual.
Yes, their image was more than they realized what they were.
Correct, absolutely.
Glenn Gould, he failed too.
Yeah. Well, we all do. People should be so lucky to fail like a McLuhan or like a Gould or like a
yeah,
Trudeau.
they're so gracefully, to fail so gracefully.
Yeah, yeah.
He said in '79, I don't know where, he was on the phone with that guy who did the bibliography down in Florida, and I overheard him. And he said, "It's just me and George now." Say the two guys survived everything. We're the only two guys left in Canada.
That's right. And one of them didn't have too much time left.
And he didn't know I was standing there witnessing this, and I was the other guy that survived.
That's right.
He didn't notice that. Or maybe he did. He used to, as things wound down. I mean, remember, Carolyn gave him the D-cell, the water purifier, the day before his stroke, or a couple days before the stroke. And when he had a stroke on Friday, and September 26, '79, and then Jim, what's her name, Margaret? What's her name? The secretary.
Stewart.
Yeah. Jim Stewart comes in, and there on the little table in the hallway was the D-cell unopened that Carolyn had left for Marshall like 5 days before, maybe on a Sunday. And he didn't get to the D-cell. And it was sitting there, very symbolic of me being handed the torch, or the bulletin, or the baseball bat, whatever you hand on to people. It's so symbolic. Our little artifact was there. And Jim Stewart.
The entire tradition can be called a series of unopened packages.
Yeah, yeah. And so I took that as a sign. I knew, oh, wow, look at that. And Jim Stewart, he knew what the D-cell was. We had shown it to him. It was a water purifier, which led on to what we sell now, the living water. We have a whole new amazing apparatus. It goes way beyond what Joe Dunn Sloan made with his little concrete D-cells.
Is that what you call it, the living water?
Yes. What we're selling is living water, and we don't sell it to people because it'll kill them. It's too powerful. You got to be on our products for a few years to be able to take what it does to you. So what we are selling now, just beginning, is a watered down version of living water. 3 cans. One's called Mind, another's called Body, and another's called Spirit. And so those 3 cans will be marketing soon, and you drink them for a while to get your body tuned to be able to take the living water.
I see. So I believe the word whiskey means living water in Gaelic.
Yeah.
And vodka may mean something like that in Slavic.
You know what you got to listen to? I'll show you the link. You got to listen to Ion analyzing Finnegan's Wake, and he's showing that the pages are in the wrong order. So we've done 31 episodes, so 31 pages, and it usually includes a bit from the previous page, like we did 137 last Saturday. So we started at 136, and we went all the way to 139, because it ended the first question in Chapter 6 of Book 1 about who was the great erector, and the answer is Finn McCool. And Ion goes along and selects words and phrases. It's uncanny. And he proves that Finn McCool is Donald Trump. It's amazing. and so I post this on the Finnegan's Wake forum, and a couple people listen to it and go, interesting. But it is pretty astounding that Ion does this every time. He goes through the pages and shows how the words refer to the events in the news of that period, of that week. We do this every couple of weeks. We do a page. But I've sent you. I want you to listen to them and see what you make of this.
All right, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
Isn't it important to note that everything in Finnegan's Wake can be interpreted in this way and that way, but its lack of literal meaning that is the key.
Yes, but
right?
People find it. They look for the past in it. They don't see this week's news the week you're doing that page. So it's a very refined, super talented pattern recognition based on the cliche that, well, you can find anything in there. I like to see you do this, or anybody do what Ian does. So, anyways, it's pretty phenomenal. It's a revolutionary way to do
me the link.
Yeah, I think you find it entertaining. Interesting process. Yeah, so I'm going to send you the list and start with the latest. Carol was listening to the first episode, and I had to go on for hours because Ian wasn't saying anything. I don't know what was going on. I couldn't get Ian to say anything. In light of how in subsequent performances, man, he had a lot to say, but there was some hesitation going on in the first. I don't know if he was getting oriented or looking over the whole book, or I don't know, but it was very interesting, the reticence in the first effort. So I don't want anybody to hear that, because you just hear me reading and nothing coming from Ian compared to how much Ian interrupts me when I'm reading it now. I just go a line or two, and then he says, okay, hold it, and then he explains the words. And it takes a while to get through the one page. Mm-hmm. Anyways, it's very interesting. And also, Ian says you can figure out Finneg's Wake with something called a Playfair cipher. You ever heard of those? Playfair ciphers.
No, there's a vague bell ringing, but I wouldn't be able to say what it.
Right, you've heard of it. I'll send you the link to the Playfair cipher as defined in Wikipedia. Well, he says the Playfair cipher is angel, the word angel. So we're putting it right out there. If you know how to do the Playfair cipher, you can figure out how Finneg's Wake, you can crack the code of Finneg's Wake. So I doubt if anybody can do it, but eventually we'll get Ian to show us how it's done. Anyways, it's very exciting way to look at Finneg's Wake. It's a totally new way. Illustrating the old point once again. You know, the points that you say we keep repeating.
Mm-hmm.
Or the patterns. So then, my next quote.
So I guess I would just say that the test of any science is whether or not it can apply to what's right in front of us.
Yeah.
So it's when alchemy was doing its thing, there were many interesting things that it had to say. About things that had gone on in the past and things that people might think about was going on in the laboratory or something.
Yeah.
But when chemistry was able to say, look, here's a gas, if you heat it in such and such a way, here's what you get at the end, then that was a revolution in human history. It was the present could be demonstrably understood in this way, could be taught, its ramifications could be drawn from it. And that's McLuhan's classroom without walls.
Yeah.
It's what he says is, excuse me, sorry, it's what he says is computer programming.
Right. He once said in a lecture that we should have gone with the analog computer, not the digital. I didn't know at the time. This was in September '78. What the hell is an analog computer? You know?
Yeah. That's interesting. Because right at that time, he says stuff like. Maybe I've gone wrong by emphasizing the acoustic too much as opposed to the visual.
Yeah, he says that in late 70s? Same time.
That's right. And that's right. And that's one understanding of an analog computer, right? The analog is visual or literary.
Yeah.
And the computer is digital or electronic. And what he's saying with the analog computer is that those need to be understood in their ratio.
The analog one?
Well, the visual and the acoustic together, or the analog and the digital together. So a ratio is always 2.
Right.
And so what McLuhan was doing at the very end of his life, as he was coming back to his notion that unless you talk in terms of ratios, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, he, in Cultures Are Business, said he predicts we will flip individual values. And he might have said that somewhere else, but that's what, by the late 70s, we were going to flip individual again. That's why he was saying that.
Right.
It's time for me to change my statement about where we're at. The acoustic doesn't apply anymore. And that became the neoconservative 80s.
Oh, and it's still going on today.
Yeah.
It's gone on for 70 years.
Well, 40 since 1980.
40 since 1980. But as you were saying before, history kind of stopped in 1945.
Yes.
And what happens in 1945 is the revolutionary aspects of the atomic bomb are papered over in a myriad different ways. But the bomb as the environment is not entered into.
Yeah, some essay he wrote in the mid-'60s, short thing. He said, the bomb is the university all compact.
That's right.
There's a great line. The bomb.
That's right. And I think you have that quotation
in my thing here.
In your book. That's either from the essay on Burroughs.
Yeah.
Or from a related letter right around that time.
Yeah.
But what I found particularly interesting about that is the phrase "all compact."
Yes.
Which you just emphasized.
I'm the first person in the world to say that out loud. You might have said it to yourself, but no one ever said it to you.
Yeah. Well, I've got several posts that talk about this because in 1933, in McLuhan's MA thesis on George Meredith, he cites one passage from Meredith in this very short MA thesis, which is only 100 pages long, and it's double-spaced, so it's a very short work.
Yeah.
He quotes one passage from Meredith 5 times in that short work.
Wow.
So he cites it over and over and over again. And what Meredith is talking about is the attempt to pass through what he calls the clashing rocks of asceticism on the one hand and sensuality on the other.
Oh, that's Scylla and Charybdis.
That's right.
In Ulysses.
And what Meredith says is that this attempted passage is all compact of human destiny, something like that. But he uses the phrase "all compact."
Wow.
So McLuhan is quoting himself from 30 years earlier,
right,
when he uses the phrase "all compact."
Very good
you're
find.
Talking about.
Very good find. Well, but nobody ever would bring up that phrase to you, but I did it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm worthy of being in the same room as you.
More than worthy, yes.
More than worthy, right. No, it'd be very interesting if Tom Cooper, Logan, any of these Bruce Powell, if they listen to us, what would they say? Because we're saying stuff that's never been heard before in relation to McLuhan. And we're what is it? Gathering together our ammunition. What did Hercules or somebody, he said, gather together stuff. He said to Pound in 51, I'm gathering together ammunition and I intend to use it. But we're gathering together, or I'm presenting this book, which is evoking what you're gathering in your work, is the work on McLuhan that no one ever talks about. They don't know how to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. So the great question is, how do you start to talk about this stuff?
Yeah.
There's a kind of a labyrinth that you need to go through before you can start to talk about this stuff. And that's the great difficulty is in that prior starting place.
Right. So we go back to 1961, and he says jet travel and satellite broadcasting will foster the grasp of languages, ancient and modern, in a simultaneous cultural transparency. Boy, look at that. What a statement. Jet travel and satellite broadcasting will foster the grasp of languages, ancient and modern. What are ancient languages? What are modern? In a simultaneous cultural transparency. That's actually a great statement about Finnegan's Wake.
Sure, absolutely. But what he's talking about there can't be understood literally in terms of languages. So he's already said by 1961, he's already said that the media are languages. And so he says that what we need in order to understand media are new grammars. And he actually wrote an unpublished essay on the grammar of media in, I think it was 57 or 58, that I've published in my blog. And so he's saying that we're going to get a new grasp of media, ancient and modern. That is to say that the Star Wars that have always been going on anciently and are going on right now and modernly, we're going to get a new grasp of that. So what he's expressing there is a hope, and that hope is still outstanding as we speak. Maybe we're going to get that understanding, and maybe we're going to find some peace, or maybe we're not, and we're going to blow ourselves sky high.
Yeah, and I never thought of this before. Ancient and modern, that's the ancient quarrel.
That's right. Absolutely. So you can see him more or less quoting himself in 1961, quoting himself from the
40s.
Quarrel of the Trivium.
Yeah, 1946. And when he says simultaneous cultural transparency, that's the new collective consciousness. No more unconscious. So you brought up, an hour or two ago about the strange aspect of using the unconscious unconsciously. Did you say something like that?
Yeah. So no more unconscious doesn't mean that we have some sort of flash of enlightenment and nothing is hidden. It means that just as chemistry can understand all of nature, there's nothing in nature that chemistry and physics and biology don't understand, but that understanding will go on forever because the understanding, although it is of everything, is also always limited. And in fact, the insight is associated with that limitation. So it's the same with the unconscious. The unconscious now becomes what we are understanding. It's the interior landscape. And but does that mean that everything is understood in a flash? No. It means that we will go on understanding this forever.
Yes, so I say in response to that quote, that was happening. But most people were listening to Cliff Richard's pop music, starting to learn the twist. They weren't grasping languages, ancient and modern. McLuhan was too optimistic about what intelligence would do with its time, its new leisure. McLuhan was too optimistic about what intelligence would do with its time, its new leisure. Everybody was paranoid of simultaneous cultural transparency. Don't know about that. They weren't grasping, that needs to be teased out.
Well, they're still not grasping that.
Right,
That's
but they're acting it out. They're acting it out unconsciously.
Yeah, they have to act it out because that's who we are.
Yeah, that's who we've become.
Yeah, but it's not exactly true to say McLuhan was too optimistic. What we need to say is McLuhan in this expression was being too optimistic.
Yeah.
But McLuhan wasn't limited to that expression. McLuhan understood full well that this transparency could well not become conscious, could not become the object of investigation.
Opaque. A new opaqueness.
That's right. Exactly.
So let's leave with that precise answer. Exactly. You have to, you're even a little overtime here, right?
Yeah. So it's a perfect ending for now. I got to go and take my medicine and make sure the dog is all right and do all the stuff that human beings do.
Excellent, and that was quite a conversation.
Yes, Bob, enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Cameron, we'll talk soon.
Well, look forward.
Okay, bye.
Bye.